Hi, so here I am playing Ashes of the Singularity, and I just wanted to lay out some things that I had trouble getting used to as a formal former Total Annihilation Supreme Commander player. This is a very TA style game, but there are some ways in which this game differs from TA pretty significantly, and I was about to take a break and was worried that I was going to forget everything, so I thought I would write some stuff down. So, I think the most important thing as a player of the single-player campaign, all of this is about the single-player campaign, so if you're playing a bunch of multiplayer, I'm not going to be of much help to you, but as a player of the single-player campaign, probably the single most important thing was watching this this ranking of power here, and looking at that overall military and economic strength number, and basically, if I drop noticeably below minus, some scenarios start you way behind, but in any scenario, once you sort of catch up, if you drop way below your enemies, probably not going to be able to recover. I've just been, if I get way below my enemies, I pretty much just go back to my previous save. So that relative power measure is really important. It is really key in this game when you're first starting out to rush the resource points, even if you can only send 3 or 4 people at the beginning. These resource points are usually pretty free of enemies. Even just sending half a dozen of the tier 1 things, what I call frigates, is actually quite effective. Frigates. Even sending a half a dozen frigates is actually quite effective early on at keeping the enemy away from your resource points. And then once you've captured a bunch of resource points, there will be, you'll find one that you can't capture because the enemy is actually fortifying it, and that's going to basically draw your battle lines for the early part of the game. But yeah, watch your power, watch your relative power, rush resource points. Those are sort of my two main serious tips. The plus and minus keys cycle you through on the keyboard or down here, although I never use them down here, but the plus and minus keys cycle you through various speeds of the game, which I find super helpful. I definitely recommend making heavy use of both very low and very high speeds for planning and getting shit done, respectively. I will note that when the game is all the way paused, there's a visual error that occurs. So the shift key will show you, for example, the shift key will show you the radius of various items, how far away people's radar are or whatever. If you show it, if you use it, Alt. If you use it here, all of those circles will just stay painted, and if you order people to move around, they'll tell you that they've moved to 3 different places. This is just that whole thing. That is just a visual bug. There's nothing actually wrong. You're all of the commands are being given correctly. It just shows up weird. So things get painted very weirdly when it's paused. You can just ignore that. As soon as you unpause and things start moving, it'll all get back to normal. Let's see. Cheap units. The frigates you build very, very fast in this game. With the first 1,000 metal that you start with, in most scenarios, you can get you can have you can build a factory right away and have a couple of dozen frigates out of that initial factory on your initial resources inside of 5 minutes at normal speed. Less than that, probably 2 or 3 minutes. It's really fast. And the gap between how fast the frigates build and how fast the cruisers build is really substantial. So you can get a lot of value in this game from just building a boatload of frigates because they're so much cheaper and they build so much faster. You end up with really, really effective armies that are just these giant boatloads of frigates. At least early on. Later on, not so much. You generally will want to have at least 1 or 2 air bases. I just, tend to put them at my home base. Oh, I didn't make one. Don't seem to have made one on this map. But yeah, it's generally a good idea to build 1 or 2 air bases as a fast reaction force, so that if something goes sideways in some random location on your map, that you can respond to that very quickly. And with my air forces, I pretty much just make bombers. I pretty much just make bombers. I maybe throw in a couple of the air superiority fighters, but basically I just make bombers. You'll notice that a number of my factories are idle. We will get to that in just a second. Let's talk about normal base construction. So let's see, where's a dude? Here's a dude. Okay, so normal base. A normal base is typically going to be built over a resource point, so you slap down your metal extractor or your radioactive extractor on your resource point, and then my recommendation is a sensor and a couple of Smarties in whatever direction you think the enemy is going to come from, and then a couple of constables pretty much anywhere. Those are the anti-air, the initial anti-air, and then an amplifier on the resource point, maybe some refineries if you're having resource troubles, and then to build up the base, like the more serious base is like, I'm actually, this is my front lines, I want to stay here for a while. So drone bays are extremely effective offense. Repair bays are extremely effective defense. You can make a really good front line by just, dropping like 2 or 3 repair bays, and having your armies park on the repair base, which will repair them up quite quickly. With any base that you're being kind of serious about, you want an orbital nullifier. For a base that you're really serious about it, you want 2 overlapping orbital nullifiers. The orbital abilities that call down the giant strike, you really don't want that to happen at all. Repair bays, drone bays. You will want to, for any place that's serious enough that you bother to put down an amplifier, you will probably want to use Optimize. Optimize significantly increases your amplifier's output. It's pretty great. For the constable, you're going to want to upgrade probably most of them, especially in the early game, to Falcon anti-air. That's that's the sort of high-speed aircraft shooting thing. Air Eliminator is when your enemy is like producing like the tier 2 bombers that can really, where like a single bomber can really do serious damage and has some armor. Again, same thing with Smarties. You're going to want barrager turrets most of the time. The only time you're going to want artillery posts is when you think that you can put the Smarties close enough to another base to actually just lob fire into the other base, which is totally a thing that you can do. And that leads to a general discussion about line of sight. There are a lot of units in this game, like the artillery, the artillery posts, and the artillery cruisers. What are they called? The Heras and the Artemises, right? And then the artillery dreadnoughts, right? All of those are going to be able to hit things that are considerably outside of what you'd expect, especially from sort of a total annihilation perspective. Like they can hit things really quite far away, but only if they can see them. And they'll automatically you're gonna want to let the unit AI make a lot of the decisions in this game. And so just like parking an army sort of near-ish to an enemy base, and then flying a couple of planes over just to see those buildings, and then once like you know where they are, your units will typically just keep firing at them indefinitely. even if you can't see them anymore, especially if you have radar. And then, fly a plane over occasionally, see how it's going, right, that sort of thing. But you can launch, like, let me see if I can find you a good example here, like this base here, like these things here, like I could quite easily trash them from like over here if I had artillery units, or like down here or whatever. Maybe not from over here, it depends on the unit, but I bet like the artillery dreadnought could hit things from there. Considerable distance. Okay, some other things. So drones. Drones show up on screen as these little fuzzy. They kind of look like black flies or mosquitoes. They're actually quite powerful. You can damage them pretty effectively with the plasma storm orbital ability. Those will fry the drones pretty well because they're individually quite weak. Carving turrets are pretty effective, but they can only engage dreadnoughts and juggernauts. But for that, right, if an enemy's got a dreadnought coming towards you, they're pretty effective. It is often worthwhile to use sappers or sentries or incursions or anything else that is a unit with sight. I guess not sapper, really. You're going to want that for building more. But for sentries and incursions, you can deploy near enemy lines to get that visual on the enemy. Sensor sweep will do that too a little bit. All three of those you can use to get that visual on the enemy for your artillery bombardment. You can also use any support ability that has a range. You can use that to get a really clear idea of where orbital nullifiers are, right? So there's clearly an orbital nullifier around here somewhere, and in fact we can actually see this area, so you can actually just see that's the orbital quantum jam or whatever, same thing. But yeah, you can use your orbit abilities to kind of scan out the general area of where orbital nullifiers are, which you will often want to attack first with your units so that you can drop flaming death on your enemies. General sort of, I guess you could sort of call it main base building, right? Normally your front lines are going to be far away from your main base. If the front lines ever get to your main base, you're probably already screwed, right? So there are these. So I often, since I don't expect my front lines to be anywhere near here, I often stick a lot of my support buildings here. You're going to want to build. One each of all of these technology buildings. Pretty much no matter what. The orbital nullifier is a little bit of a special case that often sort of has direct usefulness, and the orbital fabricator can be a good way to get engineers on the front lines because after repeat uses, engineer drop and call sapper gets expensive. And then you're going to want to buy a lot of quantum relays. Why do you want to buy a lot of quantum relays? Because these upgrades are amazing. There is nothing like them in other games of this type that I have played. They make a really significant difference. Like my weapon damage is at nearly double from upgrades, and my experience is that like if you don't buy the upgrades, your enemy will, and the upgrades, the weapon and armor upgrades, are enough to really make the difference between whether or not an army is effective. I've seen when I've been considerably ahead of my enemy on upgrades, I've seen my armies tear through like noticeably larger concentrations of forces, and in particular, like if you're behind on your upgrades and you go after an enemy base with like regular units, it gets really unfortunate really fast. So I really strongly recommend getting these upgrades. Okay, and last, the most significant difference between this game and Total Annihilation is the army management. You can only specifically the armies with reinforcements. So you can only build armies with reinforcements around cruisers or better, right? So a cruiser or a dreadnought. I typically just wait until I've got dreadnoughts and build them around dreadnoughts and sort of just do little things up until then. But you can totally, especially on more difficult maps, you can totally build an army around some cruisers. And I generally build, regardless of what I do, I generally build armies matching, with sort of specific purposes matching the 3 dreadnought purposes, right? So artillery, long distance destruction of buildings is one type. Dealing with, crowd control, dealing with lots of small units is another type, and dealing with the dreadnoughts is a third type. So even if I don't have any dreadnoughts, I'll generally build armies around those lines. But the reason that armies are important is that you can, there's a couple of things. One is that you can look at your entire force and see exactly what's laid out very, very easily. And in these tooltips it will say what each unit type does. But more importantly, you can use that to direct your production. So as I said earlier, I have 3 idle factories, so we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that by saying, well, this is a new Kronos. It's an artillery dreadnought. It needs some of the light units because everybody does, especially medics. We love lots of medics for our dreadnoughts. And then we're going to need Charon and Mobile Nullifier. Every army wants these. Mobile Nullifier does exactly what it sounds like. It means you can't get fire rained down on you by the enemy. And Charon means that reinforcements immediately pop to this unit instead of having to walk across the map, right? And then this is an anti-dreadnought unit, so everybody gets some Apollos, which are the anti-air and anti-drone things. And then for the anti-dreadnought, for the artillery dreadnoughts, we get some Heras, and we get some Artemises.
We need more logistics.
And I mean, sometimes I throw in some Nemesises in there to try that. Some Zeuses for sort of general utility. It kind of depends on the overall flow of the battle. Not really. The point is that now I've got a plan for what I want, and I can see how I'm progressing to that plan. And then, more importantly, sort of later on in the battle, I can look back and be like, well, how are these people doing? And a trick I often do is I'll buy one of them, right? Okay, so 1 brute, right? Okay, so we've got 20 brutes already, that's fine. We've got 20 archers already, that's fine. We've got some Hermes, we've got a bunch of medics, great. What are we short on? This is a Prometheus, so this is a Dreadnought Destroyer. So what do we want? We want Apollos always, a couple more Apollos, and Nemesises. So we're actually doing pretty good here. And we've got 2 Charons, and they give us 1 more Mobile Nullifier. Now that's a bit of a silly example because we're kind of full up, but if this, this is also a bad example because he's dying because I've been ignoring him, but if this army had been through a big fight, I'd be able to look at that and go, wow, that our Prometheus doesn't have any Nemesises at all. We should really fix that, right? And then, similarly, our Kronos doesn't have any Heras. We should fix that, right? So it lets you set armies to a purpose and then just go and look at each of your armies and see whether they're still meeting that purpose. Now, the one disadvantage and the thing that I totally hate about this is you'll see that as we, the number in the bottom right, the number in the top left is how many we have, the number in the bottom right is how many we want. As we get more, that number in the bottom right will go down. So we can't say, I want you to always have 20 medics and maintain 20 medics. We have to go every once in a while and check each army and be like, okay, this army doesn't have any medics, let's get some medics, right? You can't just fire and forget on your army composition, which is kind of dumb, honestly, but nobody asked me. Now, the important part there is you'll notice that my factories, I no longer have any not-in-use factories. Sort of an important part there is there's going to be a transition point where early in the game you're just throwing sort of bundles of units out of your out of your factories. Like you might do, you set it on repeat, and then you do like, I want 5 brutes and a couple archers and a couple Hermes and a couple of medics, and just keep doing that until the cows come home, right? If you have it set up like this, army reinforcements just won't work at all. You need to completely clear out your queues for army reinforcements to work, and then it will draw your army reinforcements from your factories. I just have no idea how it does that. In particular, I don't know how to tell what unit a factory is building for. I got the impression from one YouTube video I watched that it's possible, but I have no idea how to do it. So it's mostly just you set your armies to reinforce, and then units show up, and you hope that they don't do stupid things like walk all the way across the map to get to you when there was a factory 5 feet away, which I've been told they sometimes do. So, but basically, you just wait, and eventually your army will have all of the units that you asked for, assuming that you have enough resources and so on. So, and I think that's it. I think that's my summary of all of the things that I learned about how to play this game versus other similar games that I played, and hopefully it's of use to somebody besides me. Good night, everybody.